All right. Thank you for jumping on, joining me, either live or sometime in the near future. Welcome to another fun daily insight, Civics edition, brought to you by and powered by ldhadvising.com. That's L as in Lord, D as in Donovan, H as in Hylton, advising.com. Huge shout out to them. And make sure, if nothing else, that you are respectfully hitting that like bell, pressing that follow and subscription button for those that are following me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And for those that are on LinkedIn watching, in the past, I have showed, well, we'll let it go. At any rate, those that are on LinkedIn, I can't actually show the screen, if you will, of the article I'm covering today. And so if you want, you can go on to my Facebook page, vote for, number four, as you know, vote for Donovan Hylton, or you can go to my LinkedIn or my YouTube channel, vote for Donovan Hylton, and you can watch the video live. And so again, thank you for liking, following as well. And let's go ahead and jump right into it. Again, Donovan Hylton, I am your brand building partner as well as your leadership coach. And when it comes to brand building is a process that I've had to learn to master for myself and then help create strong, respectfully public perception as well as emotional connection for my clients in the business, government, and community sectors. And leadership at the end of the day is something that we must do for ourselves. And if you're looking to grow a strong brand, grow a strong message company, organization, work with strong people, help build strong people, then we must be able to model what leadership is. And it's a constant journey for us all. And so therefore, I'm coaching myself as well as serve as a coach for others. So if you want to reach out to me, you can connect through our sponsor, again, ldhadvising.com, find out more about my work. Today, we're going to jump in, we're going to jump into civics again, conversation focused on Sudan, the country Sudan and the continent of Africa. And again, when it comes to civics, I like to cover everything based in the United States and the United Kingdom that is in urban areas, as well as covering stories in African countries or the African diaspora countries, if you will. And so I've covered quite a bit of, I've had quite a bit of, in this series of Sudan, quite a bit of videos that I've used and covered. One of my most recent ones is this one was with NBC News. Supreme Court paves the way for Trump to send migrants to South Sudan. And today we're going to, this is coming from ABC News. Sudan has become a case study for the impact of USAID cuts. Aid worker says. So disclaimer, this is at the minimum, an opinion, but because it's from the aid worker, respectfully, if I'm not speaking out of ignorance, but we do want to become aware of what's going on. Again, I like to cover topics and focuses in urban areas, especially when it comes to civics. And those urban areas can be, can be countries in Africa, on the continent of Africa, or it could be in urban areas of the United States or the United Kingdom, just simply because I like to make sure that I like to spread that information. It's just my thing. So with that said, we're going to jump right in. Huge shout out to ABC News for covering this article. Here we go. Sudan has become a case study for the impact of U.S. aid cuts, aid worker says. And I wanted to cover this story. Again, I like to just cover things that come my way. And I like to, I read and reflect. I go about my business. But because I want to open up, share some of my insights, and connect with you all, I take this information, I bring it back to the table so we can all discuss. And so with that being said, in this case, Sudan has become a case study for impact of U.S. aid cuts. I know we've been following the various, we talked about with the new U.S. administration going more, I use the word lean as far as their operating budget, their that process. And so that includes cuts. Again, I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm just covering them to help stimulate conversation and also see if there's solutions to some of these challenges that may have directly or indirectly occurred, in these urban areas. So again, we're jumping into the cuts that's been made, and it's now these cuts are affecting Sudan. The last article that we discussed with Sudan was respectfully migrants, being sent to South Sudan, and we've been covering some of the challenges that have been going on. And so now here we are a few weeks later with, just a perspective at the minimum of what the USAID cuts have looked like. So funding gaps amid civil war leave 60% of the population in need of assistance. This is why I am speaking on this topic, and I'm going to speak on things all over the world, within the United States, United Kingdom. If you have anything urban-based with CIVICS, if you want to send to me, go ahead and send it to me. I'll see if I can cover it. But ultimately, we're talking about funding gaps amid a civil war, which have 60% of the population in need of assistance. I want to shout out Chris Boccia, or Boccia, forgive me if I mispronounce your name, for putting this article together. Huge shout out to you. Here we go into the article. Humanitarians in Sudan, where a 2-year civil war has given rise to, commercial break me please, shout out to my friend Joe T. Baker III. Please follow my friend Joe T. Baker at jtb3.org. That's J as in Joe, T as in Tom, B as in Baker, numerical number 3.org. He has a great story of perseverance, and when he shares his story, he uses the words commercial break me please to separate what he's explaining in his story and his respected opinion or thoughts. And so commercial break me please, we're talking about a 2-year civil war. First of all, so go back to the article. Humanitarians in Sudan, where a 2-year civil war has given rise to the world's most acute needs and made assistance increasingly difficult, warn that a vacuum left by cuts to U.S. funding for aid programs cannot be filled. So I'll say that in so many words. Acute needs and made assistance rise to the world's most acute needs and made assistance increasingly difficult. Warn that a vacuum left by cuts to U.S. funding for aid programs cannot be filled. The civil war between the country's army and a civil war between the country's army and a paramilitary group has displaced 11 million people internally, and 4 million more are refugees in other countries. Let's just take a moment to let that sink in, respectfully. We're talking about a 2-year civil war between the country's army and a paramilitary group, which has displaced 11 million people internally. 4 million more are refugees in other countries. Then you have migrants from the U.S. being sent to this country, and you also have cuts happening. And so I just want to cover public information as this is what's going on. It's the only place, forgive me for not saying commercial break me please, back to the article. It's the only place in the world where famine conditions have been confirmed in multiple locations. And the United Nations says 30 million Sudanese require assistance, or 60% of the country's population. The U.S. shuttered its arm for foreign assistance at the beginning of July, formerly the U.S. Agency for International Development, folding it under the State Department in a move Secretary of State Marco Rubio said marked the end of an era of government sanctioned inefficiency. Commercial break me, please. So formerly the U.S. agency, okay, so folding it. So the State Department in a move, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said basically this marks the end of an era of government sanctioned efficiency. We'd love to see what that means, what that looks like, because I'm learning, I'm new. So era of government sanctioned efficiency. If that's the case, that's kind of tough to see and read, because there needed to be efficiency there if there's any integrity as far as, that aid and those resources being there. And it's been very fortunate for those resources to be there, prior. And it looks like there were some efficiencies as to why that era has ended. Leave your thoughts, and if possible, we'd love to get respectfully a representative from the department, from the State Department, to speak, and enlighten us, on this perspective, as I am ignorant, respectfully. Back to the article. And the U.S. Senate could vote on legislation proposed by the Trump administration as soon as this week to claw back over $8 billion in funding due to be dispersed for U.S. aid in the remainder of the fiscal year. That's tough. Clawing back over $8 billion in funding due to be dispersed for U.S. aid in the remainder of the fiscal year. Moving forward, our assistance will be targeted and time limited. Okay. Commercial break me, please. Now this looks like, let's go back to the article. This looks like Rubio wrote on Substack, adding the U.S. will favor those nations that have demonstrated both the ability and willingness to help themselves, and will target our resources to areas where they can have a multiplier effect. Let's let that sink in. Let's let this whole paragraph sink in. So I'm going to go back to the previous paragraph. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this marks the end of an era of government-sanctioned inefficiencies, rolling back possibly $8 billion of funding that was supposed to be dispersed for the remainder of the fiscal year. And the Secretary of State adds, moving forward, okay, our assistance will be targeted and time limited. So let's get that clear, respectfully. Time limited. So that there is not going to be, it's time limited and it's targeted. Where is that target now and in the future? That's yet to be seen on my end. I don't know. That's why I would love to get a representative of the State Department, to join me on the podcast. That'd be awesome. Just to share their thoughts and see, what those targets look like, and also adding the U.S. will favor those nations that have demonstrated. I'm going to highlight this word, demonstrated. Give a practical exhibition and the explanation of how a machine, skill, or craft works. So there's going to have to be practical examples and documentation, if you will, of a process that is bringing somewhat of a return. So what it looks like, the U.S. can then invest. I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or indifferent, but what I look at from this is, okay, respectfully, those countries in Africa, their governments, if you will, at the minimum, have to show, if I'm not speaking out of ignorance, and I know there's a lot of things behind it, I don't, but will have to show sustainability or the ability and willingness to help themselves. And we'll target our resources, the areas where they can have multiplier. So again, I'm assuming the nations are helping them, looking to help themselves. And so these are conversations that I would love to be a part of in those nations, as far as what do we need as far as resources? Who do we need to connect with to build conversations and relationships? And I know that these nations and these governments already, and these representatives are doing that. But as someone that is a builder of brands and looks like, as I get deeper into my career, builder of ecosystems, that's another conversation that's growing with me. But as I look into those things, it's basically becoming a conversation of what are the action steps. And again, when you are looking to, as a brand builder, and you're talking about nations, respectfully, for one, the nation's first customers are themselves, which are the people, and the people, which are the constituents and the representatives of the government themselves. Those are your customer base. And so when you are looking to increase your customer base, when you're looking to build your customer base, you have to get people to buy into what you are providing, what you're offering, what you're selling. And so when you have a brand possibly that's already existed, and you may have people that have a perception of a particular culture within that brand, and then the brand wants to maybe change that culture, you have to change the people's or the constituents or the customer base's mindset about your culture, about your message, about your perception, based on respectfully what those customers or constituents or individuals may be going through now or gone through the past, if that makes sense. So you're looking to change a perception and build connectivity. And right now, respectfully, in this particular country of Sudan, there's 15 million individuals at the minimum going through challenges. And now you have rollbacks going on. You have funding from a particular nation, another nation really coming to a halt. And then that nation that was providing funding is now saying, we need to see your government agency exemplify by showing us what you're able to do with your resources so that we can bring in, and I'm assuming the resources that we bring in, it has to be complementing what the original nation that's providing funding has to complement their direction. So that's why I see the word willingness come in. So you have to have the ability, which is actually, showing that you have a process that is successful, an input, a process, and an output. You have a system that's successful, and you got your GDP going and things of that nature. So there's your ability to demonstrate, and now your willingness is basically what does a working relationship look like between our nation, which is the funder, and your nation, which is the fundee. I'm not speaking out of ignorance, And so that's a two-part conversation. So now you're looking at, it's a two-part conversation. You got to first get your system together, and then with your system together as best as possible and as quickly as possible, you have to have a relationship with the financiers, if you will, to basically show your ability and also build a rapport to show your willingness to work with the financiers. And that's why it's a lot going on. It's a lot going on. And it boils down to, at the end of the day, relationship building and relationship management and dealing with people. And I'm going to say that to say there's a series I've been covering, and I don't know how much this plays a role. When I say there's a series I'm covering, and I don't know how much the new direction the U.S. and the State Department respectfully is going as far as your ability and your willingness to demonstrate success, if you will. But there is another conversation I've been following, and it's dealing with financing as well, and that's the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, if you will, conglomerate with multiple partners coming, with multiple partners called BRICS, all about BRICS. And so I've done quite a bit of, I did a few, couple of stories on BRICS. And so it's about relationship building. I've done more stories on BRICS, but we'll just, that's what we have here. Again, vote for Danavan Hylton on YouTube. Check that out. And so this is kind of where we're going. And so this is why I don't mind being at the table, with Sudan and kind of say, hey, look, this is what this means respectfully. And you have to do it in a way where you're already respectfully having those challenges going on with your civil war, and you got migrants coming in, and now you're having to build something to show another financier that you can be sustainable. So they not only so they can possibly think about funding you because they have a target that they're focusing on now, and so it's a lot of moving parts. And again, this is why I want to bring it to the table, and this is why I want to, you know, bring it to the table and want to reach out so we can see what solutions look like. But this kind of looks like the direction the current administration of the United States is going in, based on U.S. State Department Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Moving forward, the months-long drawdown of U.S. aid reduced its staff by 83%, down from 10,000 employees to a few hundred, and resulted in stop work orders for grantees of its funds, including in Sudan. The State Department says the life-saving work of the agency, which distributes grants to aid implementers, is continuing, and said its new America First foreign assistance policy will be accountable to policymakers in Washington instead of global entities like the United Nations. And this is where I'm still learning, because I'm just reading what I'm reading, and respectfully, it looks like there's perspective of or perception of the UN maybe having a little having influence. But what we can do is America First foreign assistance policy. We can see what that looks like, and if you want me to speak on that in the future, we could jump into it, because the America First foreign assistance policy, the America First foreign assistance policy looks like. Let's just pull this up real quick and see what this looks like. And again, I don't know if it's actual, what it's called or whatnot, but I know there's an America First theme, and foreign assistance policy is what we're talking about right now. So let's see what it says here. The America First foreign assistance policy, as articulated by the Trump administration, emphasizes prioritizing American national interest and security in the allocation of foreign aid. So American national interest and security in the allocation of foreign aid. This approach involves a reevaluation and a realignment of foreign programs. So let's just use those words right now, because that's what's going on with USAID. At the minimum, it looks like a reevaluation and a realignment of foreign aid programs. That's what we're seeing here, aiming to ensure they directly benefit the United States and its citizens. And so I think that's where the statement from the Secretary of State is saying, we're going in a new direction in regards to a new era, if you will, based on a reassessment that directly benefits the United States and its citizens. So I'm assuming that the previous programs were not directly benefiting the United States and its citizens. Again, I don't know. I would love to be at those tables. It's a lot, though, because when you get to know how the stuff works, it's like, whoa. Moving on. Back into the America First foreign assistance policy. Key aspects include focusing on programs that align with U.S. strategic interests, strengthening partnerships with allies who share these interests, and reducing funding for programs deemed ineffective or misaligned. And so that's what I have highlighted here. What I have highlighted, strengthening partnerships with allies who share these interests. That's the willingness part that the new administration is going. So you have the ability, but the willingness, which is a partnership that share the interest at the minimum of an America First policy. And so you have to look at when you're having these kind of conversations, and you have to build a working relationship, you have to look at, okay, this brand over here knows what it wants. This brand over here knows what it wants. We as a brand, we need to come together and figure out what we want. I'm not saying we don't know, but let's confirm what we want, because when you confirm what you want, now you're able to go to the table and you can build as best you can a working relationship, because you are asking and you know what you want, and you are being receptive and open to the idea and negotiable to what that other side is looking for and what they want. So it's a situation where I'm gonna leave my thoughts to myself, but this gives a little more understanding of the America First policy, and why, a perspective or an approach is being the way it is, if that makes sense. But ultimately, those resources that the U.S. provides are for those that have the ability and willingness to work with the U.S. based on their agenda and direction. And if there's a willingness there, then the U.S. is looking to multiply what those nations are doing. So I would say the other nations have to start focusing on. I'm not saying start, but it's. I'm gonna leave my thoughts to myself. Let me know what you all think in the comments. Let me know what you all think in the comments. But we're going back to that America First foreign assistance policy. Will be accountable to policymakers in Washington instead of global entities like the United Nations. So I'm not sure how the program, I don't know. So let's move on. Moving on, a senior State Department official last week called the end of USAID and the institution of a new overarching office at state a milestone for American engagement in the world. American engagement in the world. So that's commercial break me, please. I can see when I read those words, American engagement in the world, and me being a community engagement specialist when it comes to brand building, relationship management, you're dealing with people, and that could be community engagement, in which we just talked about. You are increasing community presence, you're increasing the interest of people buying into what you're talking about, but you're also talking about in brand building to some degree, you're also talking about business development, and you're growing your customer base. And the way that you grow your customer base and in a particular way with relationship management is by truly building relationships with sources that can direct leads to you, and you are doing the same, if you will, in a strategic way. It's everyone's getting something. It's a smooth flow. And so when I look at community engagement, I see American engagement. Basically, you're talking about buy-in, community. You're talking about a world buying into. Well, really, you're talking about just the U.S. building working relationships. And one way the U.S. feels that the relationship process as it's going, one way to show its milestone of its relationship building is to, what it looks like, hold certain programs and revamp its working relationship policies. And so it makes me think of a company where, let's say a company is like, they're getting funding. A company is getting funding from a body, from an institution. They're getting funding. And this company's been getting funding for years, but all of a sudden they want to change the model of how they work with their customers. Meaning, so the funding comes from an institution, so that the customers that come into the company can. So basically, the company is getting paid from the institution on behalf of the customers, if that makes sense. So when you're looking at a company that's getting paid by a financial institution on behalf of the customers, the company is not necessarily charging the customer. The customer is just to make sure that they are connected to the funding institution so that the company can charge and build a funding institution. And what I mean by that is, if a company has a particular business model where they are working with customers a particular way and they're getting funding from the customers to this institution, and then the company says all of a sudden, hey, this is efficient. We want to be more efficient. So we want to have our customers, work with us doing this instead of this now. So we used to do this, but now we're going to do this over here. And what happens is, as that company's been growing, they've been working with customers. Those customers that are already there, some of them might say, "Hey, I like the way that y'all been doing this, but since you're creating a new business model and you want to do it like this, it doesn't work for us, so we're going to leave." And so when you're going through those processes, things will shift, and people will leave. And you might want to still protect your brand by saying, if you're the company, I understand you want to leave because we're no longer doing it this way. We're now doing it this way. And tell you what, these are some other companies that we vetted and have relationships with that we want to refer you to. So that way, it makes your job a little easier. And what that does is it provides at least no hard feelings, an opportunity for a continued working relationship, because sometimes things don't work, but you can always try to provide solutions out of good gesture, if that makes sense. And a good gesture is, hey, I know we've been working together for years because this institution has been paying for your services because we've been doing it this way, but now we're changing our whole model. We're doing it this way. And so, because you don't want to do it this way, we understand. And so we're going to refer you to this company so that you can do it the way you like it. But ultimately, any new customers that we're getting from this financial institution, they're going to come in doing it this way. We're no longer doing it the other way. And I'm speaking very broad if all this makes sense. And so I'm just thinking of things that are like milestones, for a company. Milestones being we're changing the way we do things. And so let me know if you have any questions, any thoughts on that. Moving on into the article. I'm going to repeat this last sentence, which is this paragraph. A senior State Department official last week called the end of USAID in the institution of a new overarching office at state, a milestone for American engagement in the world, saying the U.S. assistance abroad would be linked up diplomatically with U.S. interests. So basically, with the current U.S. direction, U.S. assistance abroad is going to be linked up diplomatically with U.S. interests. So I take it wasn't, from what I'm assuming, as far as the changes. The British medical journal Lancet found that in the absence of USAID's funds and works, 14 million more people would die in the next 5 years, a third of those children under 5. And this is why I'm covering the story. Need to be solutions. Who wants to come to the table? Funding is a big one. Foreign trade policies, things like that. Because what it's looking like is, with the new direction of the U.S. when it comes to funding, if you will, and foreign aid assistance, there has to be certain things in place. So that's why I really would like to see if we can connect with the State Department representative to find out exactly what those things are. Or maybe if you want me to do some more research on what those things are, you can put funding assistance requirements in the comments, and we'll look up, what that looks like, if we can find some information of, what the expectations are from the U.S. as far as financing, because it's serious business. It's what's going on here. The senior State Department official downplayed the study. You can go back and relitigate all these little decisions. That's not our focus. That's not the secretary's focus, the official said. We're excited about what sort of the America First foreign assistance agenda is going to look like and how much impact we can have moving forward. I'm going to repeat that quote again. We are excited about what sort of the America First foreign assistance agenda is going to look like and how much impact we can have moving forward. Meanwhile, in the world's most dire humanitarian crisis, where access for emergency food and medical workers has been made increasingly difficult by warring parties, people are fleeing violence on foot, children are malnourished, and the Sudanese are dying from treatable conditions. Pedro Cortez, an emergency logistics coordinator for Medicine Sans Frontieres, Doctors Without Borders, or MSF, said children He sees crossing Sudan's borders are malnourished at a rate of 29%. The cuts of U.S. aid and the chaos that followed have come with a body count. I'll repeat that again. Excuse me. Excuse me, y'all. The cuts to U.S. aid and the chaos that followed have come with a body count. In Sudan, said Tom Perrillo, the U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan in the last year of the Biden administration from 2024 to 2025. Maybe we can do an interview with Tom. There were 29 USAID employees in Sudan in 2023 at the outset of the war, according to then Administrator Samantha Powers. The July 1 reprogramming of U.S. aid into the State Department cut 2 additional U.S. staffers dedicated to Sudan, leaving just 9 remaining in the region, said Andrea Tracy, a former U.S. aid Sudan official who now runs her own humanitarian funding mechanism for the country. We'd love to get an article with or an interview with Andrea to see what she has been able to do or would like to do or is focusing on from an outside in for funding, and with her experience being with the USAID and going into her own private practice, if you will. What can we do? Andrea would definitely need to be somebody at the table at the minimum from what she's been able to experience and do. Tracy saw colleagues lose their jobs on a daily basis as USAID wound down the programs it funded in the country. She told US ABC News in a June phone call. I was talking to one of the regional directors the other day, and just that morning she got an email saying another 40 programs are going to be cut, she said. So we haven't found that floor yet. The dramatic reorientation of U.S. aid abroad comes as the United Kingdom, Switzerland, and Germany have announced a scaling down of their own foreign assistance budgets, and as humanitarian crises in places like Sudan, where civil war has stretched into a third year deepen. So it looks like foreign aid, not only from U.S., but other countries are scaling down. And I'm not quite sure how that's impacting Sudan with those other countries scaling down on foreign aid. Excuse me, y'all. A UN spokesman told ABC News that food aid, nutrition support, and essential health services have been cut back as the UN's annual fund for Sudan is funded at only 23%. Without urgent additional support, the risk of famine and further deterioration remains high, said Dan Tingo, a spokesperson for the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. The State Department did not respond to requests by ABC News for the current data on its assistance commitments to Sudan after foreign aid freezes and layoffs. But it said in a statement that foreign assistance continues to arrive in Sudan, citing a $56 million donation to the World Food Program and a wheat grain delivery under USAID that would feed as many as 3.2 million people for an entire month. It all $56 million to feed 3.2 million people for a month. It also said emergency assistance continues for refugees in Sudan who have been displaced to 7 neighboring countries due to the conflict. Important dollars for refugee assistance are in jeopardy, too, as humanitarians brace for impact of a proposed $1.7 billion cut to U.S. refugee assistance. As part of Rubio's reorganization, the State Department proposed a 50% reduction for aid to the world's refugees in its 2026 budget request to Congress. Thoughts? Leave them in the comments. We want professional thoughts, of course. If you don't really have nothing too well to say, just leave it to yourself respectfully. Chain reactions and healthcare at the brink. Humanitarians who are legally protected under international law have not been spared from the violence of the Civil War, which has deprived people of their chance to stave off starvation and made access increasingly difficult. Five humanitarians in June died when a UN envoy came under attack, the UN said. Wow. So 5 humanitarians in June passed away when a UN convoy came under attack. Wow. Very dangerous. Respects to those that have passed, and prayers, of course, which is why we're here for that whole area. And upliftment, revitalization, things working for good. I know it's difficult. In the void, small grassroots organizations began to sprout when the war broke out 2 years ago. A coalition known as Mutual Aid stood up emergency clinics and soup kitchens that became a lifeline for Sudanese, Tracy said. The coalition was backed by nearly 80% funding from USAID, organizers have said. Wow. When the White House on President Donald Trump's first day in office froze all U.S. assistance abroad, Tracy said some 1,500 of the kitchens in Sudan closed almost immediately. Carrillo, whose role as a special envoy in Sudan has been left vacant by the Trump administration, said the Mutual Aid Coalition was among a group of edgy efforts redefining approaches to aid. These programs suffered the first and deepest cuts, he said. Tracy said the pain from the cuts has been felt almost acutely in the health sector, where medicine is not moving the way it used to, and a chain of different components that rely on each other are not in place. Once you break one of those components, it all breaks, he said. MSF, which provides emergency medical care in Sudan, is operating in a country where the World Health Organization estimates only 20 to 30% of the health facilities are optional. I do want to shout out Malie Hylton. I see she joined us. So those all around the world, shout out to Malie Hylton. Wherever we look in Sudan, you will find humanitarian medical needs. All those needs are overwhelming, urgent, and unfortunately unmet, Claire Sanfilippo, MSF's emergency coordinator for Sudan, said. A case study for impact of cuts. At the Tyne border point in Chad, east of the violence-plunged Darfur region of Sudan, Cortaz, the emergency coordinator of MSF, told ABC News, the cuts are impossible to miss. Clinically, we tend to see people that are in much worse condition than before because of all that, he said. MSF is independent and donor-funded, taking no dollars from U.S. government and therefore not directly affected by the cuts and shutdown of USAID. So MSF is commercial break, please. MSF is independent and donor funded. Love to know who those donors are, for sure. Sudan has become a case study for the impact of those cuts, Cortaz said. One of the examples you can touch first, he said, is the lack of shelter for refugees under a 110-degree sun. People arrived by foot in Chad has spent the day with no form of shelter, he said. I don't want to dismiss that. It's unimaginable to me. And so I try my best to be the best individual I can be for myself and those that would love to be in my position. You know, I give my all best I can. I do rest and things of that nature, but on top of everything going on, you got 110-degree sun over your head. Children, elderly, scared individuals, men and women. Back to the article. The 18,000 people hosted in Tyne should have had at least 350 toilets, meeting a standard in acute situations of one toilet for every 50 people. Cortaz said, But for a group surging toward 20,000 people, it had only 9 toilets. But for a group surging toward 20,000 people, it only had 9 toilets. Asked whether the large, interconnected humanitarian system is neglecting Sudan, Cortaz agreed. A majority of the weight is lying on us, on the host community, and on grassroots organizations that are doing their best to support the population, he said. So yes. Commercial breaking, please. I don't know everything going on, so I don't want to speak out of ignorance or out of lack of integrity. But for those that are genuinely trying to keep things together and keep things going and providing assistance, those majority with their weight lying on them, those communities and grassroots organizations, which I know so well, in these urban areas, these grassroots trying to make two pennies rub together respectfully to make something happen and provide a social service to support a population. I want to thank you. I'm assuming everything's integral and you're all trying your best. I stand in agreement on your covering. It's a lot going on, and you're providing services in an unforeseen situation. Not unforeseen, an uncertain situation. Uncertain is the word. So thank you. There's others I know that are doing similar work all over the world in all countries. I know. But as we're just looking at the article, I just want the record to show. Back to the article. For the first time in my life, Tracy said, MSF doctors and administrators told her, we really need the USAID money to come back online because we're carrying way more of a load than we can handle. We're falling apart here. And that's the end of the article, and that's why I am reaching out. If I can help and provide insight, access or resources to those that are now having to, be in a position where you have to build something, at least from a U.S. perspective, you're building your own program that is sustaining itself in some form so that the U.S. can see what you're doing and eventually invest in what you're doing if you're willing to work with the U.S. and their interest, which means you have to know your interest and find a way to make those work. And that's where the situation is, not just for Sudan, but it looks like for all African diaspora countries at the minimum, which are already going through challenges. So cuts don't make it easier. And from a macro to micro scale, I can see this and even these municipalities are doing, I feel, financially and social economically doing a little more well than these countries. But the United States municipalities across the U.S. that I cover in urban areas as well, they go through these same challenges in their pockets of communities and neighborhoods that I'm a part of and I see all the time. And so this is why I like to cover these things. If it can stimulate conversation, that's the purpose of it. And if there's a way that solutions can be brought to the table, that's the ultimate purpose. Because respectfully, lives are at stake. And with the shift, we all have to shift and find a way to make it work. And so please let me know what you think. Again, I want to thank ABC News for covering the story. Thank you to Chris Boccia. Please forgive me if I mispronounced your last name, for covering the story. Let's go ahead and click on Chris real quick to give Chris some highlights. So here's Chris. He's done quite a bit. Let's do this. Let's give Chris some highlights. We're gonna go to LinkedIn. Make sure you all follow me on LinkedIn as well, Danavan Hylton. Follow my LinkedIn page, LDH Advising as well as LDH Podcast. Podcast Insight into Insight. Shouts to my friend Evan Holiday, doing his things, affordable. He is the founder of a consulting firm that builds affordable housing throughout the U.S. And I met him years ago in Nashville as he was a developer for a affordable housing development company. He eventually branched off and started his own company. Has a great team and doing great work across the U.S. I was doing something on LinkedIn. Oh yeah, looking up Chris. Let's see if Chris pops up. Okay, I don't see him. Here we go. Christopher. Shout out to Chris Boccia, digital journalist at ABC News Washington. I'm going to go and follow you now, Chris. Let's do that live. A little bit about Chris. Chris is a digital journalist at ABC News, reporting and producing for the Global Affairs team in the network's Washington Bureau. Chris has filed reports for radio, abcnews.com, and the television platforms as part of ABC News Global Affairs team. And Chris produced in studio for the anchors of ABC's flagship political programs This Week with George Stephanopoulos. We're going to leave it there. Please make sure you follow our friend Christopher Boccia. Huge shout out to you, my friend. And again, you all, let me know what you think about this story. And if there's any questions or concerns that you have, be sure to put those questions in the comments or send me a direct message. Thank you for being respectful in your comments and respectful to one another in life. And thank you for liking, subscribing, following, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, and donating in the financial amount you felt this message was worth to you so we can continue to keep this going. And hopefully I can build some kind of platform and have money set aside to contribute as well. To any organization, brand, or business, as we can see, capital to a brand or business is like blood to the body. You have to do it. You got blood flow, you got cash flow. Let's not get started in that. But anyway, let me know what y'all think. Wishing you all the best. Set an agreement for your success. And I'm going to see you at the top. Peace.